New York City's West Village. On this land, some of history's most important social and cultural movements have taken place. But did you know that it's also home to the smallest piece of private property in all of New York City? Quite possibly the entire world. Wait, did we miss it? Just a second. This is the Hess Triangle, and it's a monument to what may be the pettiest landlord in American history. Our story begins in 1910, when New York City was planning to extend 7th Avenue to reach 11th Street, in the process building a subway station. To do this, they had to tear down a bunch of apartment buildings that were standing here. This happened all the time in the early 1900s when cities were expanding. It's a type of eminent domain law which people generally don't like but get paid to deal with anyways. What's important here is they made the owners of these apartment buildings pretty upset. Most of them would get over it, but not this guy. This guy is named David Hess, and he was ready to fight the city with everything he had, which, as it turns out, isn't that much when you're fighting against a city. He lost the property in 1913. This isn't the end though, because 9 years later, while going through some old documents, Hess noticed that the city had forgotten about a small triangle of land, about 25 inches wide, in their new deed for the property. When he noticed this, he saw an opportunity to claim what was rightfully his. So he packed his whole family into a van and drove up from Philadelphia to put up a notice of possession on their new triangle. Once the city found out what was going on, they tried to stop him, but Mr. Hess wasn't budging this time. Just to rub it in 1922, the family had a plaque installed on their triangle that reads, "Property of the Hess estate, which has never been donated for public use." They never removed the plaque or maintained it by the looks of it, so this piece of dirty landlord history still lives on to this very day. Anyways, now you've got me thinking about real estate holdouts. You guys know that big Macy's building in New York City? You know, the world's biggest store. Think about how insane it is that a single department store occupies an entire block of space in Manhattan. Yeah, that would be insane, because it isn't actually an entire block. The $1 Million Corner has been keeping Macy's from reaching its final form ever since 1900, when they were outbid on a single corner property at a price of $375,000. The man who bought this property was named Robert H. Smith, and as it turns out, he was working in cahoots with rival department store Siegel Cooper to try and steal Macy's crown of biggest department store out from under their noses. In 1911, Siegel Cooper finally gave up and decided to sell the property for a then record $1 million, a feat which would be equally insane today, but for the opposite reason. Macy's later made a deal allowing for them to advertise on the property, which led to the giant shopping bag on the roof, but the ownership has remained out of their hands. Even now, the corner is subject to heated retail rivalry as, just a few months ago, Macy's alleged in court that the current owners were trying to lease the space to Amazon. Personally, I didn't even know Amazon had physical storefronts until I was researching for this video, but now that I know, I think there's some interesting social commentary that can be said about the changes in consumer preferences over the last decade never mind. While some corporations can go to great lengths in the name of competition, there's something uniquely petty about one person wasting their time, money, and energy just to spite another. That's right, it's time to talk about spite houses. A spite house is a building constructed just to irritate a neighbor, usually by spoiling their view or devaluing their property some way. Some early examples include the home of Thomas McCobb, a fisherman from Maine who would spend long periods of time away from his family at sea. In the early 1800s, after one of these fishing trips, Thomas returned home to find his stepbrother and their family had broken his father's will and claimed the family's secluded forest home for themselves. He heard about this and he didn't complain. He didn't fight to get the house back. He decided to build a massive, ornate mansion right across the street. Known simply as the Spite House, it featured such accommodations as an octagonal cupola, a rooftop balustrade that circled the entire building, and 4 whole chimneys, which is probably 3 more than his old house had. The place was set to be demolished after Thomas died, but instead it was moved from Phippsburg to Rockport, Maine in 1925 and has been spiting other random families ever since. Many similar houses were built prior to 1900, but in the 20th century, they became much less common as zoning laws became more of a thing. Another reason was the rising cost of building materials across the globe. But decades later, in 1933, one woman would prove that if you had enough money, nothing could stop you from ruining someone else's life. Karina Kavanagh, an Irish millionaire living in Buenos Aires, wanted to marry well. When she met the Ancarena family, one of the most esteemed in all of South America, she thought their young son would make the perfect candidate. There was only one problem. Karina might have been rich, but she was out of her league. Now, I bet you can tell where this is going, but I'll give you a few seconds to think while you get some context. This was the site of the Ancarena family home in 1933. This, across the San Martin Plaza, is the Basilica of the Holy Sacrament, a Gothic-inspired building considered to be one of the most beautiful churches in all of South America. Paid for by the Ancarena family 18 years earlier, this fixture of the Buenos Aires skyline was also used by members of the family as a final resting place, giving it great sentimental value. But notice that while these two locations are very, very, very close to each other, I had to do that weird pan to show you them both in the same clip. That's because we don't have any satellite imagery from before 1933. Okay, time's up. Can you guess what Karina did? Karina bought a patch of land right in between the Ancarena's home and their church, and commissioned a massive skyscraper, one that would eventually become the tallest building in all of South America. The Kavanagh building quickly became a local favorite and top tourist destination, and the Ancarena family unfortunately had to sell their home 3 years later. It's wild to me that someone did this. To have an entire skyscraper built to block someone's view and take attention from their already famous building. Now that is another level of petty. But you know what they say, Spite House always wins.